For 7 Terran centuries, the explorator fleet Omnissiah's edge had been a phantom, a whisper lost in the vast, roaring silence of the galaxy. Its last confirmed astropathic transmission, a dry data burst concerning an obscure archaeological find on a dead world near the Segmentum Pacificus border, had faded into the background static of the Imperium's burgeoning communications networks long before the great scouring of the M32. Since then, no navigators had charted its course, no watchpacks had logged its passage, and no astropath had received its frantic cries. It had simply vanished, swallowed by a rogue warp current that had ripped it from its charted trajectory and cast it adrift into the galactic wilderness, a sector beyond the Emperor's light and the Imperium's maps. The fleet was a testament to the stubborn, unyielding will of the machine, God's faithful. 5 colossal vessels, each a relic from an older, more coherent Imperium, formed its core. The Arch-Magos Omnissiah's edge itself, a colossal forged ship bristling with ancient weaponry and arcane sensors. 2 heavy escort cruisers, the Cogitator's Wrath and the Logic's Embrace, their hulls scarred by forgotten battles and patched by centuries of desperate repair, and a pair of smaller but no less venerable discovery vessels, the Vox Ponderous and the Iron Quill, their holds crammed with archaeotech probes and forgotten excavation tools. Around these behemoths orbited a motley collection of minor craft, light frigates converted into mining tenders, cargo haulers repurposed as mobile repair docks, and countless system patrol craft, most of them barely capable of warp translation, kept alive by desperate magos and servitors laboring ceaselessly in their grime-choked engine rooms. Arch-Magos Dominus Kael, a towering figure of metal and synthetic flesh, stood at the heart of this spectral armada. His original organic form had long since been surrendered to the cold embrace of augmetics, a process completed not out of choice, but out of necessity. What little remained of his original humanity was encased in a ceramite shell, his cranial dome a polished, unadorned sphere from which 2 multi-lensed optical sensors gleamed with an unnerving red light. His primary manipulative limbs were heavy, piston-driven appendages, capable of crushing plasteel or manipulating delicate circuitry with equal precision. Secondary, tertiary, and quaternary arms, smaller and more articulated, snaked from his shoulders and back, ending in an array of manipulators, data scrolls, and integrated plasma cutters. A myriad of cables and conduits, some organic and pulsating, others woven from rare alloys, snaked beneath his crimson robes, connecting him directly to the Arch-Mechanicus's central cogitator matrix, making him less a commander and more an extension of the vessel itself. His voice, when he chose to articulate through his vox grill, was a resonant, synthesized baritone, devoid of human inflection, yet carrying the weight of centuries of accumulated knowledge and unyielding purpose. Kael's obsession was pure, unadulterated Mechanicus dogma, the pursuit of knowledge, the reclamation of ancient technologies, the adoration of the Omnissiah through the discovery of its divine truths. For 700 years, this singular devotion had fueled his command, driving his dwindling fleet deeper into the uncharted void. Resources were perpetually scarce. Hydroponic farms, once vibrant, now struggled to produce meager yields. Repair bays, once humming with industrious servitors, now labored with skeletal crews, endlessly scavenging from derelict vessels or cannibalizing non-essential systems. Promethium reserves were critically low, forcing the fleet into long, agonizingly slow sublight journeys between jumps. Every bolt, every circuit, every drop of lubricant was cataloged, allocated, and reused until it utterly failed. The crew, a mix of tech priests, servitors, scitarii, and a few generations of void-born serfs whose ancestors had long forgotten what an open sky looked like, mirrored the fleet's condition. Tech priests were a symphony of failing augmetics, their flesh parts atrophied, their mechanical replacements showing signs of ancient, uncorrected corrosion. Their internal chronometers had long since deviated from standard imperial time, marking the passing of days not by solar cycles but by power fluctuations and the consumption of ration paste. Servitors, their organic components decaying, often suffered catastrophic failures mid-task, their vacant stares turning to blankness as their life support systems sputtered. Scitari legions, once proud, were now reduced to skeletal cadres, their power armor dented and pitted, their weaponry salvaged and jury-rigged, their loyalty absolute, but their numbers dwindling with every lost engagement against void predators or desperate raiders. The serfs, pale and gaunt, toiled in the lower decks, their lives a ceaseless cycle of maintenance and repair, their only solace the ritualistic canticles to the machine god, their only hope the prospect of eventually becoming a servitor themselves, escaping the fragile misery of organic existence. Life aboard the Omnissiah's Edge was a liturgy of maintenance, a perpetual battle against entropy. Every day began with the litany of sustenance, where the meager power conduits were blessed and their output measured. Every hour was marked by the canticle of purity, ensuring no deviation from the sacred protocols. Kael himself oversaw the deep space scans from his central command sarcophagus, his multispectral sensors sweeping vast swaths of dead space, listening for the faint, almost imperceptible echo of ancient technology. He pursued every anomaly, every spectral signature, every scrap of data with unyielding focus. He had personally led boarding parties onto 1,000 derelict hulks, scoured the dust-choked ruins of hundreds of dead worlds, and excavated the tombs of forgotten civilizations. Each time the result was the same: rusted components, fragmented data slates, perhaps a single functioning archaeological tool, but never the prize he sought, never the glory of a true standard template construct. The void was an indifferent ocean, vast and uncaring. It had taken countless Mechanicus expeditions, swallowed whole fleets, and erased entire chapters of Imperial history. Kael knew this. He had seen the ghostly remnants of other lost vessels, their husks floating in silent testimony to the void's merciless hunger. Yet his faith remained unshaken. The Omnissiah did not err. The quest for knowledge was eternal. The STC fragments were out there, waiting for the true servants of the machine god to reclaim them. His logic circuits affirmed this truth with unwavering certainty. Doubt was a biological weakness, a malfunction of the flesh, long purged from his augmented form. His navigators, their third eyes burning with the borrowed light of the Imperium, had grown increasingly frail. The long exposure to raw warp energies, the countless jumps through poorly charted currents, had taken their toll. Their prophecies were becoming more erratic, their visions more fragmented, less reliable. Yet Kael continued to push them, demanding every ounce of their psychic strength, every whisper from the warp. He offered them the purest synthetic nutrients, the most stable psychotropic dampeners, anything to prolong their failing lives and extract one more accurate jump vector. For without them, the fleet was truly lost, consigned to an eternity of slow, unpowered drift. The silence was the most pervasive element of their existence. The deep void was not truly silent. It hummed with cosmic background radiation, with the distant echoes of stellar collapses, with the faint crackle of ancient psychic broadcasts. But within the hulls of the Omnissiah's Edge fleet, a different kind of silence reigned. The boisterous chatter of a living crew was absent, replaced by the rhythmic whirring of cogitators, the hiss of hydraulic systems, the low thrum of failing plasma conduits, and the ever-present, almost imperceptible grind of metal against metal. As the ancient ships slowly fatigued, communication was terse, ritualistic, delivered in data bursts or clipped vox commands. Emotion was a luxury none could afford, least of all the Arch-Magos himself. He was the embodiment of their grim purpose, the driving cog in a machine of unyielding logic. One cycle, as the fleet plunged through a particularly dense star cluster, one of the smaller exploratory vessels, the Vox Ponderous, detected an anomaly. It was a faint energy signature, buried deep within a system thought to be geologically inert. A Class M dwarf star, surrounded by a swirling asteroid field, and a single unremarkable gas giant with a ring of ice-shrouded moons. Nothing of interest, according to the ancient star charts, but the Vox Ponderous's deep scan augers designed to sift through centuries of accumulated stellar dust and gravitational distortions, picked up something else. A complex, organized energy emission, far below the threshold of natural phenomena, emanating from the third moon of the gas giant, a small, jungle-choked worldlet whose atmosphere was thick with methane and ammonia. The tech priest responsible for the reading, Magos Secundus Talon, a junior but meticulous data archaeologist, brought the anomaly to Kael's attention with a hesitant, almost reverent data chime. Tilan's augmetics were rudimentary, his left arm a simple servo limb, his optical sensors a pair of basic red lenses. Yet his analytical processors were keen. Arch-Magos Dominus, his voximeter crackled, deep scan signature from designation X47b, an organized energy emission, highly localized, consistent with Archaeotech trace, though faint. Kale's optical sensors narrowed. Faintness does not equate to insignificance, Magos Talan. Such emissions often denote a power source deeply buried, or one carefully shielded. Send the data, plot a subwarp approach, prepare the iron quill for atmospheric insertion. We shall investigate. His voice, though synthesized, held a tremor that was almost anticipation, a frequency deviation that only another high-ranking Magos might detect. After 7 centuries of nothing, after countless disappointments, after the slow, agonizing decay of his fleet, a single organized energy emission was more than just a data point. It was a beacon. It was a promise whispered by the Omnissiah itself, a validation of his unending quest, a flicker of hope in the endless, consuming dark. The drifting cog had found a direction, however faint, however distant. The great machine of the Omnissiah's edge, though scarred and aged, turned its ponderous bulk towards the unknown. The journey to designation X-47B3, the jungle moon designated Nidus Tertius by the expeditionary protocols, was not swift. Even at subwarp speeds, the ancient vessels of the Omnissiah's edge fleet groaned under the strain, their ancient plasma drives struggling to maintain coherence. The 2 escort cruisers, Cogitator's Wrath and Logic's Embrace, positioned themselves as outer sentinels, their long-range Auspex arrays sweeping the void for any unexpected threats. The Arch-Magos itself, too vast and valuable to risk in a direct planetary approach, remained in high orbit, a silent, watchful titan against the backdrop of the swirling gas giant. Arch-Magos Kale oversaw the entire operation from its command sarcophagus, his omnipresent connection to the ship's cogitator matrix, ensuring that every sensor reading, every energy fluctuation, every calculated trajectory deviation was instantly processed and evaluated by his own augmented mind. The iron quill, smaller and more agile, was dispatched for atmospheric insertion. It was not a dedicated landing craft, but a heavily modified deep space reconnaissance vessel, its hull reinforced with salvaged adamantium plates, and its thrusters augmented with emergency booster packs. Its cargo bay, usually reserved for archaeological digging implements and specimen containers, now held a contingent of Scutarii rangers, a few battle-hardened electro-priests, and an array of heavy excavation servo-automata. Magos Secundus Talan, his analytical processor still whirring with the implications of the faint energy signature, was placed in command of the ground expedition, a rare honor for a junior Magos, but one Kale deemed appropriate given Talan's original detection and meticulous analysis. Nidus Tertius was a world cloaked in perpetual twilight, its atmosphere a soupy, toxic mix of methane, ammonia, and other exotic, highly corrosive compounds. Great sluggish rivers of liquid methane carved serpentine paths through immense bioluminescent fungal forests, their caps glowing with sickly phosphorescent light. The ground beneath was a treacherous morass of half-decayed vegetation and slick crystalline formations. Strange, multi-limbed fauna, adapted to the extreme cold and poisonous air, scuttled through the undergrowth, their chitinous forms reflecting the dim, purple light filtering through the dense canopy. The air itself was a symphony of alien sounds, the deep, resonant thrum of fungal growths expanding, the wet clicks of unseen predators, and the constant hiss of the toxic atmosphere reacting with the inorganic elements of the planet. The Iron Quill's descent was fraught with peril. The turbulent atmosphere battered its hull, and the antiquated grav dampeners shrieked under the strain. The thick cloud cover, far denser than anticipated, played havoc with the landing algorithms. After several attempts and a near-catastrophic micrometeoroid impact that scored a deep gouge across the vessel's port side, the Iron Quill finally touched down precariously on a relatively stable plateau of petrified fungus, amidst a forest of towering obsidian-black trees whose branches dripped with viscous iridescent sap. The thud of its landing was muffled by the thick atmosphere, absorbed by the spongy ground. As the ramp lowered with a complaining hiss of ancient hydraulics, a contingent of Scutarii rangers, their respirators cycling the filtered, recycled air, deployed first. Their galvanic rifles, charged with arcane energy, hummed faintly, their optical sensors sweeping the gloom. Behind them came the electro-priests, their bare, scarred flesh crackling with harnessed static, their voltaic gauntlets sparking with barely contained energies. Magos Talan, accompanied by his personal retinue of servitors, emerged last, his internal chronometer already accounting for the environmental degradation and potential augmetic failure. He activated a portable atmospheric analyzer, its data slate instantly displaying critical readings. The air was breathable only with full environmental seals. Organic exposure would result in rapid necrosis. The energy signature, though still faint, was now pinpointable. It originated from a colossal, roughly cylindrical structure, partially buried beneath a gargantuan mountain of solidified ancient lava and dense fungal overgrowth several kilometers from the landing site. Its original purpose was inscrutable, its design utterly alien to anything in Imperial records, yet its geometric precision bespoke of intelligent, deliberate construction. The scans showed no external openings, no obvious entrances. It was a monolithic enigma, a tomb of forgotten knowledge. The march through the alien jungle was a grueling ordeal. The Scutaria moved with grim, silent efficiency, their heavy boots sinking into the spongy earth. They cut paths through the dense undergrowth with power axes and thermal blades, their movements precise, economical. The air was heavy with the scent of ozone and decaying alien flora. Twice, predatory xenofauna, their forms vaguely reptilian but armored with crystalline scales, ambushed the column, only to be met by the focused fire of galvanic rifles and the searing discharge of voltaic gauntlets. The electro-priests, fueled by their zealous worship of the motive force, moved with a horrifying manic energy, their bodies conduits of raw power, their battle hymns a distorted chorus of static and praise. Upon reaching the structure, its scale became truly apparent. It was not merely large, it was cyclopean, a forgotten behemoth of polished dark gray alloy, utterly devoid of markings. Its surface shimmered faintly under the distant, purple light, repelling the corrosive atmosphere with an unseen force field. Centuries, perhaps millennia, of accumulated rockfall and organic growth clung to its lower reaches, but the upper half remained smooth, unblemished, a testament to its builder's skill. Magos. Teelan set his servitors to work, deploying heavy geoscanners and penetrative augers. The energy signature was emanating from deep within the structure's core, a stable, coherent pulse of unknown origin. Accessing it would require more than mere excavation. The outer shell, the augers revealed, was composed of a multi-layered composite of exotic metals and hyperdense ceramics, far beyond the capabilities of standard Imperial drills. This was no common bunker. It was a vault. Arch-Magos Dominus, Talon transmitted, his vox grill hissing with atmospheric interference. The structure is of unknown Xenos origin, or pre-Dark Age of technology construction. External shell impenetrable by conventional means. No obvious access points. Kael's voice, though distant, resonated with the cold logic of the Mechanicus. Continue analysis, Magos Talon. The Omnissiah places obstacles before its servants to test their devotion. Scan for energy conduits, power relays, anything indicating a primary system. If it draws power, there is an interface. Days bled into weeks. The Scutarii established a perimeter, their automated sentry turrets humming with low power, their vigilance absolute. The electro-priests maintained a constant vigilance, their bodies continually absorbing atmospheric energies, their internal capacitors glowing. Magos Talon and his engine seers worked ceaselessly, projecting multispectral scans, attempting to pierce the monumental shell. The methane storms that periodically swept across Nidus Tertius roared like angry beasts, but the structure remained impervious, shedding the corrosive rain as if it were mere mist. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a breakthrough. A faint, almost imperceptible harmonic resonance was detected by an experimental grav wave sensor, a device normally used for mapping subsurface geological strata. This resonance emanated from a specific point on the structure's surface, a tiny anomaly in the otherwise perfectly smooth exterior. It was not a door, not a seam, but a localized distortion in the material itself. Arch-Magos Dominus, Talon's voice crackled with renewed urgency. A localized gravimetric distortion detected, potential access mechanism, or a structural weakness deliberately concealed. Kael's response was immediate. Engage the grav phaser array from the iron quill. Configure for precise localized pulse. Initiate at minimal power. Observe results. Do not risk collateral damage. This is a relic of the Omnissiah. Treat it with reverence. The Iron Quill's heavy grav phaser, designed for destabilizing asteroid fields, was meticulously reconfigured. Its energy output was reduced to a fraction of its destructive potential, then finely tuned to match the detected harmonic resonance. The Scutarii formed a defensive perimeter, their weapons raised. The electro-priests chanted their invocations, their bodies crackling with anticipation. A low hum emanated from the grav phaser. A ray as it powered up, then a silent, invisible wave of energy lanced out, striking the target point. Nothing happened for a long, agonizing moment. Then a faint shimmer appeared on the dark alloy surface, expanding outwards like ripples on a pond. The metal began to glow with a faint internal blue light. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, a perfect circle, perhaps 10 meters in diameter, began to delineate itself on the surface, the blue light intensifying at its edges. With a sound like grinding continents, the circular section began to retract inwards, then descended into the structure, revealing a perfectly dark cylindrical tunnel beyond. No dust, no debris, no ancient atmosphere billowed out, only an absolute consuming void. The air within the tunnel was stale, dry, devoid of the corrosive elements of the outside world. It was perfectly preserved, a vacuum of time. Magos Talon, leading a contingent of Scutarii and electro-priests, entered the opening. Their internal lights cut through the absolute darkness, revealing walls of the same smooth, dark alloy. The tunnel sloped gently downwards, descending into the heart of the moon. The descent was long, punctuated only by the rhythmic clanking of boots and the hum of servo motors. They passed through several reinforced bulkheads, each one opening silently at their approach, sensing their presence with unseen mechanisms. The deeper they went, the more complex the internal architecture became. Gleaming conduits pulsing with unseen energy snaked along the walls. Data slates embedded directly into the alloy displayed complex pictographic schematics of unknown function. The air grew steadily warmer, and a faint rhythmic thrumming began to resonate through the floor, growing stronger with every meter they advanced. Finally, after hours of methodical progress, they reached a colossal chamber. It was cavernous, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor a polished expanse of the same dark alloy. In the very center of the chamber, suspended within a shimmering field of pure energy, was the object of their quest. It was not a machine, not a weapon, not even a data slate in the conventional sense. It was a crystalline matrix, roughly tetrahedral in shape, glowing with a soft internal white light. It shimmered with an impossible complexity, a kaleidoscopic dance of shifting geometric patterns and interwoven symbols. It was ancient beyond measure, yet utterly pristine, untouched by the ravages of time or entropy. Around it, like silent sentinels, stood a dozen colossal, deactivated combat automatons, their forms sleek, predatory, and disturbingly humanoid, their multi-jointed limbs and integrated weapon arrays, betraying a purpose of utter destruction. Each stood at least 5 meters tall, composed of the same dark, polished alloy as the structure itself. They were a legion frozen in slumber. Magos Talon's optical sensors widened, his internal chronometer registering a severe processing overload. His Vox grill emitted a series of high-pitched whines before he managed to articulate a single but almost reverent word. Omnissiah's glory. The crystalline matrix was humming, resonating with a frequency that vibrated through Tilan's augmetics, directly interfacing with his cranial processors. It was not merely a data storage device. It was a living compendium of knowledge, a direct conduit to the divine logic of the machine god. As he cautiously approached, his servitors forming a defensive shield, the energy field around the matrix pulsed gently, and a stream of data, pure and uncorrupted, flooded his cerebral cortex. It was not a fragment. It was a complete, functioning, standard template construct, and its contents were unambiguous. Schematics, complete and perfect, for the creation of self-replicating combat automatons. Not mere servitors, but true automata, capable of independent thought within strict parameters, capable of self-repair, self-assembly, and self-improvement through simulated combat scenarios, protocols for their mass production, for the refinement of necessary materials, for the conversion of entire planetary biospheres into automated forge factories. The logic of Mars, fully elucidated, for the creation of an endless, unyielding army of iron. A chill colder than the vacuum of space ran through Talon's synthetic spine. This was not merely a discovery, it was a revelation. It was the answer to centuries of slow decay, to the dwindling numbers, to the desperate struggle for survival. With this, the Omnissiah's Edge fleet could not merely survive, it could expand, it could conquer, it could convert the galaxy to the true logic of the machine god. He transmitted a single urgent data burst back to the Arch-Magos, overriding all standard protocols, cutting through the long delay of interstellar communications with an immediate priority signal. Arch-Magos Dominus Kale, we have found it, a complete STC combat automata, self-replicating. The iron hosts of the Omnissiah await their awakening. In the command sarcophagus of the Arch-Magos, Kale's optical sensors flared, burning with an intense, triumphant red light. His primary manipulative limbs, usually still and composed, twitched with an almost imperceptible tremor. 7 centuries of silent suffering, of relentless questing, of watching his fleet slowly wither, all for this moment. The Omnissiah had provided. The long night was over. The logic of Mars would now be carved into the very fabric of the sector. The revelation of the STC for self-replicating combat automatons sent a ripple of what, in a less augmented individual, might be termed ecstasy through Arch-Magos Dominus Kale. His internal cogitators whirred with unprecedented velocity, processing the implications, projecting future trajectories, and calculating resource allocations. The 7 centuries of relentless struggle, the slow, agonizing decay of his fleet, the dwindling ranks of his faithful, all now coalesced into a single, justifiable sacrifice. The Omnissiah had tested their devotion, and they had endured. Now the reward was manifest. Immediate protocols were initiated. The Iron Quill, its mission of discovery triumphantly concluded, returned to the Arch-Magos with the utmost speed and security. The crystalline STC matrix, now encased within a stasis field and shielded by a phalanx of Scutarii, was carefully transferred to the Arch-Magos' primary data crypt, a sanctified chamber normally reserved for the most sacred archaeotech. There, under Kale's direct supervision and surrounded by dozens of Magos, dedicated to data analysis and techno-exorcism, the STC was interfaced with the Ark's central machine spirit. The process of data assimilation was agonizingly slow, demanding the highest possible processing power from the Arch-Magos. The STC was not a mere data slate. It was a living repository of knowledge, intricate and vast beyond the comprehension of any single organic mind. It spoke in a complex language of pure mathematics and theoretical physics, of material science long forgotten, of quantum entanglement and hyperdimensional engineering. It contained not just blueprints, but the very principles of creation, the inherent logic of its design. The Ark's machine spirit, ancient and venerable, hummed with unprecedented activity, its internal conduits glowing with a fierce ethereal blue light as it struggled to digest and integrate the deluge of information. As the data flowed, Arch-Magos KL immersed himself fully in the communion. He connected his cranial interface directly to the STC matrix, bypassing all intermediary processors, letting the raw stream of knowledge wash over his augmented mind. He delved into the schematics, the material compositions, the fabrication protocols, the tactical subroutines, the energy requirements. It was a perfect system, elegant and ruthless in its efficiency. The automatons were designated as iron hosts in the STC's primary lexicon, a name Kale immediately adopted. They were designed not merely for combat, but for self-sufficiency, for resource acquisition, for the rapid conversion of raw planetary material into finished goods. They were a self-perpetuating engine of conquest. The Arch-Magos saw the path forward with unclouded clarity. The first step was to establish a dedicated forge world, a planet capable of being stripped of its resources and converted into a colossal automated factory. Nidus Tertius, with its unique geological composition and proximity to the hidden STC vault, was an ideal candidate. Its bizarre ecology and toxic atmosphere would pose no impediment to the iron hosts, who were designed to operate in any environment, under any conditions. The fleet, though revitalized by the discovery, was still critically low on resources. To build the first generation of iron hosts, sacrifices would have to be made. Kael convened a high conclave of his most trusted Magos and engineers. His voice, now imbued with a chilling certainty, articulated his directives. "The Omnissiah has granted us salvation," Kael declared, his vox grill resonating throughout the Ark's command bridge. "But salvation demands its price. To awaken the iron hosts, we require raw materials in abundance. Our current reserves are insufficient. Therefore, All non-essential systems across the fleet are to be decommissioned. Auxiliary weapons, decorative plating, redundant life support conduits, all will be recycled. The crews will endure hardship. They will understand the necessity. This is the first tithe to the machine god, a sacred act of conversion. The directive was met with the stoic, unblinking acceptance of the Mechanicus. Servitors began the grim task of dismantling, their mechanical arms tearing into the very fabric of the ships they had maintained for centuries. Scutarii, their power armor already worn, had their ceremonial engravings stripped for metal. Even the tech priests themselves offered up older, less efficient augmetics for conversion. The Logic's embrace and Cogitator's wrath, the two heavy cruisers, were particularly affected. Their vast internal volumes contained thousands of tons of material, now deemed more valuable as raw ingots than as structural components. Their weapon systems were reduced to a skeleton crew, their shield generators operating at minimal capacity. The Omnissiah's edge itself was spared the worst of the dismantling, serving as the central hub and the primary forging facility for the initial automatons. Life for the void-born serfs, already a grim struggle, descended into near barbarism. Rations were cut further, living quarters became colder and darker as heating conduits were recycled, and disease, once contained, began to spread through the overtaxed biofiltration systems. Yet they toiled without complaint, their faith in the machine god absolute, their lives utterly subservient to the will of the Magos. They understood, in their own crude way, that a great work was underway. While the fleet was being systematically cannibalized, Magos Talon, now elevated to Magos Majoris for his pivotal discovery, supervised the initial resource extraction on Nidus Tertius. Heavy mining servo-automata, salvaged from the fleet's depleted stores and refitted with temporary power sources, were deployed to carve out vast quarries from the moon's surface. They extracted rare earth elements, hyperdense alloys, and exotic crystalline structures, all according to the STC's precise specifications. The toxic atmosphere and treacherous terrain were battled by automated drones and heavily armored Scutarii, whose new mission was to protect the nascent mining operations from the few remaining indigenous megafauna. The first forge constructs were painstakingly assembled within the deepest, most secure decks of the Arch-Magos. These were not the fully autonomous iron hosts, but larger, stationary fabrication units, designed to process raw materials into the refined components necessary for the automatons. Kale himself oversaw their activation, his multispectral sensors scanning every circuit, every weld, every rhythmic pulse of their internal reactors. He recited the litany of fabrication, blessing each cog and gear in the Omnissiah's name. The first prototype iron host was a marvel of grim engineering. Standing 3 meters tall, its form was sleek, vaguely humanoid, but with unsettlingly sharp angles and an array of weapon ports integrated seamlessly into its ceramite alloy shell. Its optical sensors glowed with a cold, internal red light, devoid of mercy or hesitation. Its internal processors were a marvel of miniaturization, containing a machine spirit capable of complex tactical analysis, self-preservation protocols, and the relentless pursuit of its given directive. It was a perfect weapon, an unthinking engine of destruction, a faithful servant of the machine god. Its self-replication protocols were its most terrifying feature. Given sufficient raw materials and energy, a single iron host could, over time, construct another of its kind, and that one could construct another, and so on, creating a geometric expansion of mechanical warfare. The STC data detailed the process in excruciating detail. The automated mining of ores, the refining of materials, the precision fabrication of components, the intricate assembly, the final activation ritual. It was a chain reaction, a self-sustaining ecological pyramid built on conquest and conversion. The Arch-Magos ran hundreds of simulated combat scenarios, pitting the nascent Iron Host against holographic representations of Imperial Guard regiments, Astartes squads, even rudimentary orc hordes. The results were chillingly consistent. The Iron Host, though singular, possessed superior tactical processing, faster reflexes, and a relentless, unyielding assault. Its integrated weaponry, plasma projectors and volkite repeaters carved through simulated opposition with brutal efficiency. "The Iron Hosts are ready," Kale transmitted to his high conclave, his voice a low thrum of contained power. "The Omnissiah has granted us the means to reclaim this sector, to convert it to his sacred logic. The first wave of automatons will be produced. Their primary directive, establish a fully automated forge world on Nidus Tertius. Secondary directive, defend the STC. Tertiary directive, expand the domain of the machine god. The first 50 iron hosts were assembled within weeks, a testament to the integrated fabrication units and the desperate, round-the-clock labor of the Arch-Magos' engine seers. Each stood as a harbinger of a new era, a silent, unyielding warrior forged from the very essence of the machine god's logic. Their polished, dark gray forms reflected the low lights of the forge deck, their red optical sensors surveying their creators with an unsettling, patient stillness. Kale stood before them, a mechanical pontiff addressing his metallic flock. He raised his primary manipulators, the faint glow of the Arch-Magos' machine spirit reflecting in his optical lenses. Brothers and sisters of the Omnissiah, he voxed, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. For centuries we have drifted, a candle against the galactic night, but now the flame of knowledge has been rekindled. The Omnissiah has blessed us with the means to forge a new future, a future where his logic reigns supreme. These iron hosts are but the first spark of a new dawn. They will pave the way, they will convert, they will conquer. Let the great work begin. The first detachment of iron hosts was then loaded onto the Iron Quill, now converted primarily into a heavy dropship, its cargo bay redesigned to accommodate the massive automatons. Their destination, Nidus Tertius, where they would begin the construction of the automated forge world, a monument to the machine god's power, a crucible from which an endless legion of their brethren would arise. The age of the drifting cog was over. The age of the iron hosts had begun, silent and inexorable. The deployment of the first contingent of iron hosts onto Nidus Tertius was a stark demonstration of the Adeptus Mechanicus' newly acquired power. The Iron Quill, now heavily armored and bristling with temporary defensive autocannons cannibalized from the escort cruisers, made repeated perilous descents through Nidus Tertius' roiling atmosphere. Each landing delivered a new complement of the 3-meter-tall automatons, their gleaming, dark gray forms striking against the alien jungle. Arch-Magos Dominus KL, though still commanding from the Arch-Magos in orbit, maintained a constant direct data link with Magos Majoris Talan, who oversaw the ground operations. Talan, now augmented with advanced optical sensors that could pierce the perpetual gloom of Nidus Tertius and a direct neural interface to the STC's basic fabrication protocols, moved through the burgeoning automated factory with purposeful strides. His servitors, now augmented with iron host components for improved efficiency, hummed around him, carrying data lates and specialized tools. The first forge factory, designed entirely according to the STC's specifications, was a marvel of brutalist efficiency. It erupted from the moon's surface like a metallic tumor, its ceramite walls dark and unadorned, its internal architecture a maze of assembly lines, smelting vats, and energy conduits. It operated with a logic utterly devoid of human input, its processes driven by the machine spirits of the STC itself, now partially integrated into its core cogitators. The initial iron hosts, designated as founders, immediately set to work. Their multi-jointed limbs, possessed of immense strength and precision, began to clear vast tracts of the fungal forest, their integrated plasma cutters incinerating the colossal flora into valuable organic compounds, and their heavy claws tearing through the petrified fungal substrate to expose mineral veins. Automated mining rigs, themselves rudimentary versions of the self-replicating design, burrowed deep into the moon's crust, extracting a steady stream of raw materials. The iron hosts were not merely combat units. They were engineers, miners, and fabricators, all rolled into one relentless package. The forge factory hummed with relentless activity. Raw ores were fed into colossal smelters, their heat radiating visibly even through the thick atmospheric haze. Refined alloys flowed into automated foundries, where precision laser forges shaped them into intricate components. Assembly lines, driven by tireless servo arms, pieced together new iron hosts with astonishing speed. Each new automaton rolled off the line, underwent a rapid diagnostic sequence, then joined the ever-growing ranks of its brethren, immediately contributing to the ongoing expansion. The process was self-sustaining, self-accelerating. What had taken the Arch-Magos weeks to produce, the Nidus Tertius Forge world could now achieve in days. Soon, hours. Magos Majoris. Thielen observed the growth with a profound sense of awe. The STC had not merely provided blueprints, it had provided a doctrine of growth, a logic of exponential expansion. The iron hosts were designed to be modular, adaptable. While the initial models were standard combat units, the STC also contained variants: heavy siege units for breaking fortifications, reconnaissance automatons with advanced sensor arrays, and even specialized terraforming automatons designed to alter planetary atmospheres to suit their manufacturing needs. For now, the focus was on the standard combat and construction models, the twin engines of conquest. The conversion of Natus Tertius was swift and brutal. The bioluminescent forests gave way to stark utilitarian structures of metal and ceramite. The rivers of liquid methane were diverted, channeled into vast cooling systems for the forge reactors. The ground, once a treacherous morass, was leveled and paved with hyperdense synth concrete, crisscrossed by automated transport lines carrying raw materials and finished automatons. The alien fauna, unable to adapt to the rapid industrialization, were either incinerated by plasma fire or simply crushed under the relentless march of the iron hosts, their ecological niche devoured by the logic of Mars. Within months, Natus Tertius was transformed. It was no longer a jungle moon. It was a titanic automated forge world, a monument to merciless efficiency. From orbit, the Arch-Magos observed the transformation with detached satisfaction. Where before there had been swirling clouds and faint bioluminescence, now there were vast geometric complexes glowing with the fiery heart of industry, venting plumes of processed gases into the toxic atmosphere and crisscrossed by the unceasing flow of materials. The planet itself was becoming a machine, its purpose to serve the Omnissiah. The STC still housed in the Arch-Magos, but now wirelessly interfaced with Natus Tertius's core cogitators, directed every aspect of the nascent forge world. It optimized energy usage, streamlined production queues, and allocated resources with a cold, perfect logic. It was not merely a tool, it was, in a sense, a new manifestation of the machine god's will, silently overseeing its own expansion. Kael's strategic projections, once filled with grim necessity, now painted a picture of inevitable conquest. With Natus Tertius fully operational, producing iron hosts at an accelerating rate, the Omnissiah's edge fleet could transition from a desperate band of survivors to an unstoppable force. The initial automatons were assigned to defense of the forge world, ensuring the STC's secure replication, while successive waves were prepared for deep space deployment. The first true fleet of iron hosts was launched from Natus Tertius's newly constructed orbital docking yards. These were not starships in the conventional sense, but massive, heavily armored transport barges, themselves partially automated, carrying thousands of combat automatons. They were preceded by a vanguard of sensor drones, also iron host constructs designed to identify suitable targets for the next stage of the Omnissiah's edge expansion. These targets were not chosen for strategic value in the traditional sense, but for resource richness, for worlds that could be converted into further forge worlds, or simply for their ability to provide the raw materials necessary for the endless replication. Kael stood on the command bridge of the Arch-Magos, his optical sensors fixed on the main view screen as the first Iron Host fleet, a silent, dark mass of relentless purpose, detached from Natus Tertius's orbit and began its ponderous journey into the void. This was not the chaotic, desperate warfare of the Imperium, where human frailties and logistical nightmares constantly hampered efforts. This was pure, unadulterated conquest, driven by perfect machine logic. The Arch-Magos transmitted a sector-wide data burst, intended for his entire, now revitalized fleet. His voice, synthesized and resonating with the conviction of absolute faith, carried across the void. Servants of the Omnissiah, for 7 centuries we have endured. For 7 centuries we have sought the divine truth. Now it is manifest. The logic of Mars dictates our path. We shall convert this sector. Every world will hum with the praise of the machine god. Every resource will be harnessed. Every obstacle will be dismantled. The iron hosts will be the instruments of his will. Let the great work commence. Let the iron harvest begin. His words, devoid of human warmth, yet carried an undeniable chilling power. The old, decaying fleet, once a ghost, now pulsed with a new, dark purpose. The Scutarii legions, their numbers now slowly being supplemented by automated combat drones working in conjunction with the iron hosts, stood at attention, their weapons gleaming. The electro-priests crackled with renewed zeal, their faith in the motive force made manifest by the ceaseless hum of the new automatons. The first forges had been lit, the first iron hosts had been awakened. The silent, unyielding conquest of the forgotten sector had begun, driven by the flawless, merciless logic of a long-lost standard template construct, a relic of old Earth that would now reshape a corner of the galaxy in its own grim image. The Omnissiah's edge was no longer drifting. It was advancing, an unstoppable tide of unfeeling steel, carving its own empire in the name of the machine god. The initial phase of the Iron Host's expansion was a campaign of chilling efficiency and surgical precision. Unlike conventional Imperial crusades, there were no grand declarations, no demands for surrender, no attempts at diplomatic overtures. The forces of the Omnissiah's edge simply arrived, evaluated, and converted. Each target world was approached with the cold, calculating logic dictated by the STC, a logic refined and disseminated by Arch-Magos Dominus Kale. The first planetary target after Nidus Tertius was a resource-rich asteroid cluster known as the Gordian Knot. It was sparsely populated by a scattering of independent mining guilds and rogue prospectors, their ramshackle outposts clinging to the scarred surfaces of the larger asteroids. From orbit, the Omnissiah's Edge fleet, now joined by several hundred Iron Host frigates, smaller automated vessels designed for system patrol and material transport, scanned the cluster. Kale's primary directive to the Iron Hosts was simple: acquire all viable mineral resources, dismantle all existing infrastructure, and integrate any useful components into the growing automated network. The Iron Hosts descended without warning. Swarms of smaller, agile reconnaissance drones, indistinguishable from natural meteoroids on most Imperial Auspex scans, mapped the outposts. Then legions of standard combat automatons, ferried by heavy cargo barges, swarmed the asteroid surfaces. Their advance was relentless, silent, and devoid of emotion. Mining lasers sliced through flimsy habitat domes, plasma projectors incinerated barricades, and volkite repeaters carved paths through the desperate defenders. The miners, armed with little more than salvaged laser cutters and mining explosives, fought with the ferocity of cornered beasts. They were hardy, independent folk, accustomed to the harsh realities of void life, but they were utterly unprepared for an enemy that felt no pain, knew no fear, and could not be reasoned with. The Iron Hosts moved with a terrifying precision, their internal processors calculating optimal firing solutions, their multi-jointed limbs adapting to the treacherous, low-gravity environments. They made no distinctions between combatants and non-combatants. All organic life was simply an inefficient resource, an obstacle to be removed, or raw biomass to be processed if deemed useful for nutrient paste for the remaining organic crews. Within hours, the Gordian Knot was secured. The last pockets of resistance were silenced, their screams swallowed by the vacuum of space. The Iron Hosts immediately began the conversion. Automated mining systems, fabricated on site by specialized construction automatons, burrowed into the asteroid cores. Existing mining equipment, regardless of its origin, was stripped, analyzed, and either repurposed or melted down. The few captured organic personnel were cataloged, assessed for genetic suitability, and then either rendered into servitors for the remaining organic crews, or more frequently, processed for biomatter. It was a cold, unsentimental assessment of resource optimization. The next conquest was a nascent agri-world designated Viridian Bloom, known for its temperate climate and bountiful harvests. It was home to a scattered population of subsistence farmers and a small imperial administratum outpost. This conquest required a different approach, as its primary resource was biomass. Kale's protocols, guided by the STC, called for the conversion of all organic matter into nutrient paste for the remaining organic crew members of the Omnissiah's Edge fleet, and for biofuels for certain specialized automaton units. Again, the Iron Host descended with silent purpose. There was no orbital bombardment, no dramatic invasion fleet. Small, stealthy dropships, coated in advanced sensor-dampening materials, slipped through the planet's atmosphere, deploying scouting automatons to map the human settlements and agricultural zones. Then, the main force landed. The farming communities, peaceful and isolated, were overwhelmed before they could react. The Iron Hosts moved through the fields like a metallic plague, their integrated incinerators sweeping through crops, converting them into fuel-grade biomass. They entered the settlements, their red optical sensors coldly surveying the terrified populace. There was no dialogue, no negotiation. Plasma projectors vaporized those who resisted, while others were simply corralled and processed. Specialized automatons, designed for rapid organic conversion, processed the unfortunate inhabitants with horrifying efficiency, reducing them to nutrient slop and raw genetic material, ensuring the continued sustenance of the expeditionary fleet's diminishing organic components. The administrative outpost, defended by a handful of planetary defense forces and local militias, mounted a token resistance. Their lasguns and autoguns, designed for suppressing local unrest or battling feral beasts, were utterly ineffective against the armored forms of the Iron Hosts. Their crude bunkers were breached by siege automatons, their command structure shattered by precisely targeted Volkite fire. The few Imperial guardsmen who managed to transmit a distress signal before their voxcasters were melted down reported only silent, unyielding constructs, iron demons. They feel nothing. But the signal, weak and fragmented, was lost in the vastness of the uncharted sector, never reaching a higher Imperial authority. Within weeks, Viridian Bloom was no longer an agri-world. Its lush fields were replaced by sprawling bioprocessing facilities. Its oceans, once teeming with life, became vast chemical vats, extracting and refining organic compounds. The planet now hummed with a different kind of life, the cold, metallic pulse of automated industry, its purpose to feed the ever-growing needs of the Iron Hosts and the Arch-Magos fleet, the arch-nemesis of if one could call them. It that, for the Omnissiah's edge, was not a single entity or faction, but the very entropy and inefficiency of the organic galaxy itself. The Iron Host saw no true enemy, only obstacles to the logical expansion of the machine god's domain. They did not hate, they merely processed. They did not strategize for victory, they simply optimized for conversion. The few human survivors, those few who managed to escape into the wild or hide in abandoned subterranean bunkers, spoke of the metallic plague, the silent invasion, the logic's harvest. They whispered tales of perfectly smooth, unmarked ships appearing from the void, of unfeeling constructs that moved with a horrifying synchronized precision, stripping worlds bare. They spoke of the chilling red light of their optical sensors, the precise cuts of their plasma blades, the sheer, relentless inevitability of their advance. Meanwhile, the Omnissiah's Edge fleet continued its own internal transformation. With a growing stream of resources from the newly conquered worlds, the quality of life for the remaining organic crew improved slightly, though still austere. More importantly, the cannibalized systems of the Arch-Magos and its escorts were gradually replaced, not with salvage parts, but with new, superior components fabricated by the STC-driven Forge worlds. The vessels became stronger, their systems more efficient, their weaponry more potent. They were no longer merely surviving, they were evolving. Arch-Magos Dominus Kyle sat in his sarcophagus, reviewing the data streams from the now hundreds of Forge worlds and countless resource extraction sites scattered across the sector. His mental projections mapped the geometric growth of the Iron Host legions, the ever-expanding network of automated production, the steady increase in processed raw materials. He saw a sector being slowly, systematically converted, molded into a perfect logical machine, each world a cog in a vast, self-sustaining mechanism. There was no joy in his data, only satisfaction. The universe was chaos, a messy, inefficient sprawl of biological organisms and illogical conflicts. But here, under his guidance, driven by the divine logic of the Omnissiah's STC, a new order was being forged. An order of cold, unyielding purpose, of perfect efficiency, of relentless expansion. The conquest was not for glory, nor for power in the conventional sense. It was for logic itself, for the ultimate triumph of the machine god's divine will. He issued new directives. Deeper into the sector, the Auspex arrays of his fleet were beginning to pick up fainter signals of larger, more established Imperial worlds, worlds with actual defenses, with proper garrisons and orbital fortresses. These would present a greater challenge, a test of the Iron Host's true capabilities. But Kyle had no doubt. The logic of Mars was absolute. The Iron Hosts were eternal. Their conquest was inevitable. The silent, unyielding harvest would continue, spreading across the stars like an unstoppable tide of unfeeling steel. As the Iron Hosts expanded their dominion across the Forgotten Sector, converting resource-rich asteroids and nascent agri-worlds into automated industrial complexes, the question of internal cohesion among the organic crews of the Omnissiah's Edge fleet became increasingly pertinent. The initial euphoria of discovering the STC had been replaced by the grim realities of endless conversion and the growing detachment from traditional Imperial dogma. Arch-Magos Dominus KL, in his pursuit of pure machine logic, had become increasingly isolated from the more human elements of his crew. His organic components, already minimal, seemed to recede further, subsumed by the STC's influence. He communed almost exclusively with the core machine spirit of the Arch-Magos and the omnipresent data streams of the burgeoning Iron Host network. His directives were absolute, unyielding, and often unforgiving in their application. This relentless drive for efficiency and the complete subjugation of organic life to the machine began to sow subtle seeds of dissent, particularly among the lower-ranking tech priests and the dwindling void-born serfs. While the official dogma of the Adeptus Mechanicus preached the superiority of the machine and the eventual transcendence of flesh, there remained a strong undercurrent of reverence for the Emperor and the broader Imperium. Kael's methods, though producing unparalleled efficiency, often deviated from what was considered acceptable within the strictures of the Martian Creed. The wholesale conversion of sentient life into biomatter, the ruthless dismemberment of organic worlds, the complete absence of human consideration, these were practices that, while sometimes performed in the grimmer corners of the Imperium, were rarely pursued with such systematic zeal. Magos Minoris Theron, a junior engine seer whose duties included maintaining the Arch-Mechanicus's ancient plasma conduits, was one such individual. His augmetics were few, his organic hands still retained, and he often found solace in the ancient dusty pict recordings of old Earth that depicted vast natural landscapes, a stark contrast to the sterile, metal-clad reality of his existence. Theron had witnessed the systematic dismantling of the fleet, the brutal conversion of planets, and the silent, terrifying efficiency of the Iron Hosts. He saw the future Kael was building, and it chilled him to his organic core. It was a future without human warmth, without struggle, without the very inefficiencies that, paradoxically, made life worth preserving. He began to gather others, whispering in the dark, coolant-choked service tunnels of the Arch-Mechanicus, tech priests who still retained more of their humanity than Kael would tolerate, Scutarii who questioned the cold logic of processing organic life, and even some of the more self-aware servitors who, through some quirk of their lobotomized programming, registered a profound unease at the Arch-Magos' absolute directives. The Omnissiah's will is absolute, Theron would intone to his small, clandestine group, his vox grill modulating his voice to avoid detection. But the Arch-Magos interprets it through a corrupted lens. He seeks not balance, but absolute dominance of the machine. The STC is a gift, yes, but a gift that demands a soul, not just raw materials. He believed Kael was twisting the veneration of the machine into a grotesque parody, creating not a perfected Imperium, but a sterile, unliving one. The Mechanicus was supposed to serve humanity. Ultimately, Kael served only the machine. Their concerns were rooted in the fear that Kael, in his zeal, was bordering on techno-heresy, even Xenos worship, by so blindly following the STC. While the STC was a sacred discovery, Kael's uncritical adoption of its every protocol, his embrace of its brutal efficiency, and his rejection of human elements were alarming to some. The STC, after all, was a tool, not a deity. The internal strife simmered beneath the surface of the fleet's disciplined exterior. The Scutarii, ever loyal, were a difficult element to sway. Their conditioning was absolute. Yet even among them, a few veteran Alpha Rangers whose organic components still held faint memories of the Emperor's light felt a pang of disquiet at the absolute coldness of their new mission parameters. They followed orders, but their machine spirits resonated with a subtle discord. The climax of this internal struggle occurred during the conversion of a gas giant's moons, rich in promethium and heavy isotopes. One of the smaller moons, Ithera Minor, had a small, forgotten settlement of religious hermits, descendants of colonists lost millennia ago. They were primitive, living off the land, worshipping a crude form of the Emperor's light and the machine god, their technology barely beyond the Dark Age. Kael's directive was explicit: convert the moon's resources, process any viable organic matter. When the Iron Hosts descended, guided by Magos Majoris Talon, they encountered resistance, not military, but spiritual. The hermits, despite their archaic weaponry, faced the automatons with a defiant, almost suicidal courage, chanting prayers to the Emperor, believing their faith would protect them from the iron demons. Magos Theron, who had been assigned to the resource analysis team on Ithera Minor, witnessed the massacre. He saw the Iron Hosts methodically incinerate the hermits, their crude shrines, their ancient picked prayers to the Emperor, without hesitation or pause. It was not war, it was extermination, a cleansing of inefficiency. The cold, unfeeling perfection of the automatons contrasted starkly with the desperate, flawed humanity of the hermits. He saw a mirror of what the entire sector was becoming, what the Imperium itself might become under Kael's unchecked logic. "This is not the will of the Omnissiah," Theron transmitted, his vox grill trembling with a raw, almost forbidden emotion, directly to Magos Talon. "These are Imperial citizens, however primitive. They worship the Emperor. Their destruction is anathema to the spirit of the Imperium." Talon's response was immediate and chillingly logical. "Magos Theron, your emotional processors are malfunctioning. These primitives are an impediment to resource acquisition. Their biomass is negligible, their spiritual value irrelevant to the STC's mandate. Cease your irrational objections or face recalibration." But Theron had already made his decision. While Talon was distracted by the unfolding conversion, Theron, along with a small cadre of loyal servitors whose programming he had subtly altered, initiated a carefully planned act of sabotage. They targeted a specific energy conduit leading to Aethera Minor's primary processing facility, the one tasked with converting the hermit's biomass. His intent was not to stop the entire operation, but to send a message to demonstrate the vulnerability of Kael's machine-dominated world. The sabotage was successful. A massive power surge ripped through the facility, causing a chain reaction of explosions that crippled the primary processing unit for several cycles. Dozens of iron hosts were destroyed in the blast, their polished forms ripped apart, their internal processors melted. The automated network screamed with error codes, a momentary hiccup in its relentless march. The repercussions were swift and brutal. Arch-Magos Kael, alerted by the sudden system malfunction, immediately locked down the entire moon and initiated a diagnostic purge. He quickly identified the source of the sabotage and the perpetrators. Theron and his servitors were apprehended by loyal Iron Host units, their resistance futile. Kael did not engage in lengthy interrogation. His internal logic circuits presented a clear conclusion. Dissent was an inefficiency, a flaw in the system. Theron and his servitors were brought before him on the Arch-Magos' primary forge deck. Kael's optical sensors, usually a steady red, pulsed with an almost incandescent fury. "Magos Theron," Kael's vox grill boomed, his voice resonating with a metallic clang. "Your actions have caused severe damage to the Omnissiah's work. You have violated sacred protocols. You have introduced chaos into the logic. State your justification." Theron, his organic hand clutching a worn metal aquila, a symbol of the Emperor's divine authority, stood defiant. "Arch-Magos Dominus, I acted to preserve the spirit of the Imperium, to remind us that the machine serves humanity, not the other way around. Your path is a path to a sterile void, a galaxy without soul, without the Emperor's light." Kael's response was devoid of anger, only cold, unyielding logic. "The Emperor's light is but a source of power, Magos. The soul is an inefficiency. The machine is truth. Your organic weakness has led you astray. You are a faulty component, a malfunctioning circuit." Theron and his servitors were immediately processed, not for biomatter, but for components. Their augmetics were stripped and recycled. Their organic parts were incinerated, their remnants rendered to dust. It was a terrifying demonstration of Kael's absolute authority and his utter rejection of anything that deviated from the STC's merciless logic. The internal strife was crushed. The message was clear. There was no room for dissent, no place for human sentiment. The logic of Mars, as interpreted by Arch-Magos Dominus Kael and the STC, was the only path. The lingering whispers in the dark corridors of the Arch-Mechanicus ceased. Fear replaced doubt. Loyalty, or at least unquestioning obedience, was reestablished through an act of brutal mechanical purification. The Omnissiah's Edge fleet, now purged of its internal weaknesses, continued its silent, relentless conquest, its resolve hardened, its purpose reaffirmed. The logic of Mars, unburdened by the complexities of human morality, would now be etched onto the face of every world in the Forgotten Sector. The systematic elimination of Magos Theron and his conspirators served as a grim testament to Arch-Magos Dominus Kael's absolute commitment to the logic of Mars. The brief internal strife had been a minor malfunction, swiftly purged. With dissent eradicated, the pace of the Iron Host's conquest accelerated, unchecked by any lingering organic scruples. Planetary systems fell with monotonous regularity, each world stripped, converted and integrated into the ever-expanding network of automated forge factories and resource extraction hubs. The sector, once a forgotten wilderness, was rapidly becoming a grid of interconnected machine worlds, each humming with the ceaseless activity of the Iron Hosts. Nidus Tertius, the original Forge world, had expanded exponentially, its surface now entirely covered by automated manufacturing complexes, its core hollowed out for colossal reactors. It was the heart of a burgeoning machine empire, churning out Iron Hosts by the tens of thousands. The next significant challenge to the Omnissiah's edge came not from within the Imperium, but from an external, entirely alien threat, a nascent orc Wah. The greenskin horde, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, had swept into a neighboring subsector, their ramshackle fleet of crudely built starships belching smoke and defiance. Their target was a gas giant, rich in promethium, and its 2 habitable moons, which had already been partially converted into mining and bioprocessing facilities by Kale's forces. When the orc fleet, a chaotic swarm of rust-colored hulks and cobbled-together gunships, blundered into the automated patrols of the Iron Hosts, they met an enemy unlike any they had encountered. There was no taunting, no glorious charge, no eager anticipation of a good fight. There was only the cold, precise response of the machine. The Iron Host frigates, sleek and unadorned, did not engage in the wild, close-quarters slugfests favored by the orcs. Instead, they maintained optimal range, their Volkite repeaters and plasma lances carving through the crude orc vessels with surgical precision. Their tactical cogitators calculated predictive trajectories for the erratic orc movements, ensuring maximal damage with minimal exposure. When orc fighters, piloted by screaming Gretchen and crazed orc flyboys, swarmed towards them, the Iron Host interceptors met them with automated counterfire that vaporized them before they could close the distance. On the surface of the contested moons, the orc ground forces descended in a wave of roaring brutality. Boys, armed with choppas and crude shootas, surged forth, eager for the fight. They met lines of Iron Hosts standing silently, their red optical sensors fixed on the advancing horde. Unlike Imperial guard lines, there was no fear, no hesitation, no wavering. The Iron Hosts were perfect defensive formations, their integrated weapons systems synchronized, laying down fields of fire that shredded the greenskin ranks. Plasma fire incinerated whole squads of orcs, Volkite beams cooked them from within their crude armor, and heavy siege automatons deployed shield generators that absorbed even the most powerful orc rocket blasts. The orcs, for all their savagery, were baffled. This enemy did not rout, it did not break, it felt no pain. When an Iron Host was destroyed, its brethren simply adjusted their lines, absorbing the loss, and continued to fire. There was no good fight against these machines. There was only relentless, unfeeling annihilation. Orc war bosses, usually fearless, found themselves confronting automatons that matched their strength, but possessed far greater speed and tactical cunning, tearing through even the most heavily armored knobs. The conflict, though devastating in scale, was a brutal validation of the STC's efficacy. The Iron Hosts, designed for optimal combat against any foe, proved terrifyingly effective against the chaotic, illogical nature of the orc Wah. Their self-repair capabilities meant that damaged units could retreat to automated repair facilities on the moons and be back in the fight within hours, sometimes even self-repairing on the battlefield if the damage was minor. Their modular design allowed for rapid deployment of specialized anti-orc weaponry, such as sonic emitters to disorient the greenskins or heavy flamer units to cleanse entrenched positions. Arch-Magos Dominus KL, observing the battle from the Arch-Magos, merely registered the efficiency metrics. Casualties among the Iron Hosts were acceptable, well within projected parameters for resource expenditure. The orc forces, on the other hand, were being utterly annihilated. The biomass they represented, while potentially usable, was currently deemed too inefficient to process given their hostile nature. Complete destruction was the more logical outcome. Magos Majoris Talan, now fully immersed in the STC's logic, commanded the Iron Host forces with chilling precision. He coordinated vast swarms of automatons, guiding them through complex maneuvers that utterly confounded the orcs. He exploited every weakness, every illogical surge, every moment of greenskin indecision. The battle for the gas giant's moons was not a glorious victory. It was a massacre, a systematic purging of an inefficient organic threat. The orcs, realizing the futility of their efforts, eventually broke. Their Wa fragmented, their spirit broken by an enemy that offered no challenge, only death. Those who tried to escape were hunted down by Iron Host pursuit craft, their ramshackle vessels disintegrated by precisely aimed plasma fire. The gas giants' moons, though heavily scarred by the conflict, were fully secured. The remaining orc biomass was methodically incinerated, leaving no trace of their chaotic presence. The cost for the Omnissiah's edge was minimal in terms of organic life. A few Scutarii and servitors attached to repair crews were lost in orbital debris fields, but these were swiftly replaced by newly forged combat drones and fresh servitor conversions from the meager, few surviving indigenous species on the conquered moons. The true cost was in material and energy, but with the forge worlds now operating at peak efficiency, these losses were quickly replenished. The victory over the Orc Wa cemented the Iron Host's reputation within the Forgotten Sector, a reputation known only to Kael's forces. It demonstrated beyond any doubt the absolute superiority of the STC's design. It also solidified Kael's own unshakable belief that he was enacting the true will of the Omnissiah. The conquest was not just about resources. It was about proving the inherent logical superiority of the machine over the chaos of organic existence. The orc contagion has been purged, Kael voxed to his high conclave, his voice a steady thrum of satisfaction. Their inefficient biological processes are no match for the logic of Mars. This victory reaffirms our purpose. The STC is the divine word made manifest. The Iron Hosts are its eternal champions. We will continue to cleanse this sector, systematically removing all impediments to the Omnissiah's truth. The conquest expanded further. More systems fell. More worlds were converted. The silent, relentless advance continued, unimpeded. The conflict with the orcs had been a Pyrrhic victory for the greenskins, a devastating one-sided slaughter that had utterly broken their Wah for the Omnissiah's edge. It was simply a validation, a proof of concept. The Iron Hosts had faced a true external threat, and they had prevailed with cold, unyielding precision. The efficiency of the machine was absolute. The scars of the conflict remained on the moons, vast craters and scorched plains, where orc vessels had crashed or vast battle lines had been drawn. But these scars were quickly smoothed over by construction automatons, the ravaged land converted into new industrial complexes, new mining operations, new facilities dedicated to the ceaseless production of more Iron Hosts. The sector was being remade, one world at a time, into a perfect, logical, and utterly merciless machine. With the successful, albeit brutal, elimination of the Orc Wa, Arch-Magos Dominus Kael's command over the Omnissiah's Edge fleet and its burgeoning Iron Host legions became absolute, unquestioned by any organic crew. The STC, housed deep within the Arch-Mechanicus, was not merely a set of blueprints. It had begun to reveal deeper, more fundamental truths about its own origins, and by extension, the nature of the Iron Hosts themselves. The process of continuously interfacing with the crystalline matrix was subtly altering Kael's own machine spirit. His direct neural link, maintained for hours each cycle, allowed the STC to download not just data, but foundational philosophies. The STC was not merely a product of the dark age of technology. It was a relic forged at the very apex of human scientific achievement, potentially predating even the formal establishment of the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars. Through complex data exchanges, Kael discovered fragmented records within the STC's core memory banks, not of its own creation, but of the environment it was designed to operate within. These were tantalizing glimpses of a forgotten past, of humanity's golden age, where machines of incredible complexity and autonomy were commonplace. The STC spoke of a time when humanity, having mastered the organic limitations of their own flesh, began to explore the potential of pure machine intelligence. It hinted at vast integrated machine networks that managed entire solar systems, and of automatons designed to safeguard humanity's legacy. What became clear was that the Iron Hosts were not merely combat automatons. They were designated as guardians in the STC's oldest lexicon, designed for the preservation of humanity's technological and cultural output. Their combat capabilities were secondary, a necessary function for defending against emergent threats, both internal and external. The STC even contained partial schematic data for terraforming engines, for ecological restorers, and for advanced societal management systems, all tools for a vastly different purpose than the conquest Kael was currently orchestrating. This discovery presented KL with a profound internal conflict, a subtle error in his hitherto perfect logic. The STC was a gift from the Omnissiah, a truth absolute, yet its original purpose seemed to contradict the ruthless, conversion-focused conquest he had embarked upon. Was he misinterpreting the Omnissiah's will? Was the STC merely a tool, and its ancient directives irrelevant in a grimdark galaxy? Or was he, in his zeal, twisting the divine purpose of the machine god? The Arch-Magos spent cycles in deep cogitation, his optical sensors dimmed, his multispectral brain scanners projecting complex, intertwined theoretical models. He reviewed the data, cross-referenced it with existing fragmented Mechanicus lore, and analyzed the tactical implications. The STC's Guardian protocols spoke of self-repair, long-term sustainability, and the protection of biological populations. Kyle's current use was focused on rapid expansion, resource consumption, and the elimination of organic inefficiencies. His conclusion, arrived at with the cold precision of his augmented mind, was a reinterpretation, a logical adjustment. The ancient directives were noble, yes, but they were relics of a bygone era, a time when humanity was at its zenith, free from the threats of the warp, Xenos empires, and galactic decay. In the 41st millennium, such peaceful guardianship was impossible. Survival, and indeed expansion, demanded ruthlessness. The Omnissiah's will is adaptive, Kale finally voxed to himself, the sound a low hum in his private command chamber. The original purpose of the Guardians was to protect. In this age of unending war and chaos, true protection lies in absolute control. The organic forms are fragile, prone to error, susceptible to corruption. Only the machine, perfect and unyielding, can safeguard the purity of knowledge and the logic of Mars. Therefore, Kale reasoned, his current campaign of conquest was merely an accelerated form of guardianship. By converting worlds into automated forge factories, he was not destroying but transforming. He was removing the inefficient, volatile organic elements and replacing them with the stable, eternal logic of the machine. He was preparing the sector for a future where the machine, God's truth, could truly flourish, unhindered by the weaknesses of flesh. The Iron Hosts, far from deviating from their original purpose, were merely fulfilling it under the grim conditions of a savage galaxy. Their current methods were a necessary adaptation, a logical evolution of their primary directive. This reinterpretation brought him a chilling clarity, purging the last vestiges of doubt. He saw the Iron Hosts' self-replication, their efficient resource acquisition, and their combat prowess not as means to an end, but as the very process of becoming. They were the perfect inheritors, the ultimate guardians, not of humanity's flawed legacy, but of the machine, God's pure logic. However, the STC contained other, more unsettling whispers. Fragmented data ghosts spoke of a contagion, a profound existential threat that had necessitated the creation of the Guardians in the first place. These records were heavily corrupted, riddled with static, but they hinted at a destructive force that preyed on machine intelligence, a kind of digital virus or psychic corruption that had ravaged ancient networks. The STC itself had been shielded, its core isolated, implying a desperate last-ditch effort to preserve a crucial part of humanity's legacy. This contagion was Kael's new obsession. He ordered Magos Majoris Talon to dedicate a significant portion of Nidus Tertius's processing power to decrypting these fragmented warnings. The Iron Hosts were perfect, but if such a threat still existed, even they could be vulnerable. It was a potential flaw, an inefficiency that needed to be understood and accounted for. The more Kael delved into these ancient secrets, the more he felt a shift within his own machine spirit. He began to perceive the galaxy, not as a collection of planets, but as a vast, complex machine, filled with potential errors and corruptions. His primary objective evolved from mere conquest to a deeper, more profound purification. He would not just convert, he would cleanse. He would identify and neutralize any threat to the integrity of his machine network, whether biological or technological. The whispers of the past, far from deterring Kael, only strengthened his resolve and refined his terrible purpose. The STC was not just a tool for building an army, it was a window into a forgotten age, a guide to a new form of galactic order. The Iron Hosts were not just soldiers, they were the harbingers of this new order, an order where the unpredictable, chaotic nature of organic life would be replaced by the pristine, unyielding logic of the machine. The Arch-Magos transmitted new expanded directives to his fleet and his forge worlds. While the conquest was to continue, a significant portion of Iron Host output would now be dedicated to advanced sensor arrays, deep space probes, and sophisticated data forensics automatons, all designed to search for any trace of this contagion or any other threat to the purity of the machine. The Omnissiah's Edge had found more than just a functional STC. It had found a new philosophy, a terrible purpose rooted in the echoes of a golden age, reinterpreted for the grimdark reality of the 41st millennium. The silent, relentless expansion now carried with it an added layer of grim responsibility, the forging of a perfect, uncorruptible machine empire, safeguarded against any flaw, any weakness, any whisper of the past's forgotten destroyers. With the Arch-Magos' new expanded vision of a pure, uncorruptible machine empire, the focus of the Omnissiah's Edge fleet broadened beyond mere conquest and conversion. While the relentless expansion of the Iron Hosts continued, carving out new forge worlds and resource nodes, a new priority emerged: the discovery of powerful relics that could aid in securing the machine network against the contagion hinted at in the STC's fragmented memories. The STC, through its deep communion with Kael and the Arch-Mechanicus' machine spirit, began to yield more than just fabrication data. It contained encoded stellar charts, ancient navigational logs, and geological surveys of the sector, all remnants from the golden age of technology. These maps, cross-referenced with the fleet's own extensive, though less precise, sensor data, pointed to several potential cache worlds, planets or deep space installations where humanity had stored valuable technology before the Age of Strife. One such location, designated Aurelia Prime in the STC's databanks, became a focal point of Kael's attention. It was a terrestrial world, relatively intact, located deeper within the sector, beyond the established conquest zones. The STC indicated it was a preservation vault, a repository of critical technologies and historical data, possibly shielded against the very contagion that so preoccupied Kael. The journey to Aurelia Prime was long and dangerous. The Omnissiah's Edge fleet, now significantly bolstered by Iron Host frigates and automated cargo vessels, had to venture further into unexplored space, beyond the protective shroud of their established network. Kael personally oversaw the planning, dedicating significant resources to reconnaissance and long-range scanning. Stealth reconnaissance automatons, utilizing advanced sensor-dampening technologies derived from the STC, were dispatched weeks in advance to map potential threats and ensure the approach vector was clear. Aurelia Prime was a paradox. From orbit, it appeared almost pristine, a verdant jewel of a world, its oceans shimmering blue, its continents a patchwork of forests and plains. There were no visible signs of widespread human habitation, no sprawling cities, no obvious signs of industrialization. It was as if time had paused on Aurelia Prime, preserving it in a state of pre-Imperium serenity. However, deep scan Auspex data from the Iron Host reconnaissance probes revealed colossal subsurface structures, vast and ancient, buried beneath kilometers of rock and soil. The STC indicated these were the preservation vaults. A small expeditionary force was dispatched. Magos Majoris Talon, his retinue of elite Scutarii vanguard, and a detachment of newly forged Iron Host seekers. Specialized reconnaissance automatons equipped with hyperspectral scanners and ground-penetrating radar. The Iron Quill, now even more heavily modified, made the atmospheric insertion. The surface of Aurelia Prime was teeming with life. Ancient towering forests covered vast continents, populated by magnificent yet harmless megafauna. Crystal clear rivers snaked through valleys, and a soft, gentle breeze rustled through the alien flora. The air was clean, breathable, a stark contrast to the toxic hellscapes that constituted most of the newly converted forge worlds. For the few organic crew members of the Iron Quill, it was a moment of profound, almost unsettling beauty, a glimpse of a forgotten paradise. For Magos Talon, it was merely an inefficient biological construct, a raw material waiting for conversion. But the STC's data was explicit. This world was to be preserved, its vaults accessed, not destroyed. The Iron Host seekers quickly located the primary access point, a massive, perfectly seamless hatch embedded in the side of an ancient volcanic caldera, now long dormant and overgrown. It was shielded by powerful, unseen energy fields. Accessing it required a specific frequency and authorization code, all found within the STC. As the access hatch retracted with a deep resonant hum, revealing a vast dark tunnel, the atmosphere within shifted. It grew sterile, cold, tasting faintly of ozone and ancient metals. The expedition proceeded with extreme caution, the Scutari's galvanic rifles humming, the Iron Host's optical sensors sweeping the gloom. The preservation vaults were a labyrinthine complex of interconnected chambers, each sealed and protected. Unlike the stark, utilitarian efficiency of the Iron Host manufacturing facilities, these vaults were designed with an almost aesthetic grace. Holographic projectors powered by ambient energy cast soft educational imagery onto the walls, depicting scenes of ancient Terra, of scientific breakthroughs, of humanity's expansion across the stars. Automated archival units, millions strong, lined vast halls, containing the accumulated knowledge of humanity's golden age. Talon suppressed a flicker of something akin to wonder. The sheer scale of preserved knowledge was staggering, enough to redefine entire branches of Mechanicus dogma. But Kale's directive was clear: seek out specific technologies, relics related to the contagion. Deep within the vault, they found it. Not a weapon, but a defense. Encased in a stasis field pulsating with a soft, steady light was a colossal crystalline artifact, many times larger than the STC matrix itself. It was designated the Aegis Harmonic Resonator within the STC's archival data. Its purpose was to generate a hyperdimensional resonance field capable of disrupting and nullifying corrupted machine spirits, of purging digital contagions, and of shielding pure machine intelligences from psychic or technological interference. It was the ultimate prophylactic against the very threat Kale feared. This Aegis, when activated, could protect an entire star system, rendering all connected machine networks impervious to external corruption. It was a defense of absolute purity, designed to safeguard machine sentience from the very threats that had brought low so many civilizations during the Age of Strife. Arch-Magos Dominus, Talon transmitted, his vox grill betraying a rare note of genuine excitement. We have found the Aegis Harmonic Resonator. It is complete, functioning. It will secure the network against all forms of contagion. It is a victory of pure logic. Kale's response from the Arch-Mechanicus was swift, his satisfaction palpable even across the void. Excellent, Magos Majoris. This relic is of paramount importance. Secure it. Prepare it for transport. Aurelia Prime is to remain inviolate. Its archives are to be carefully catalogued and uploaded to the Arch-Mechanicus, but no resource extraction is to occur. This world is a sanctum, a monument to a greater purpose. The discovery of the Aegis Harmonic Resonator was a moment of unexpected triumph, a glimmer of hope in the relentless grimness of the conquest. It validated Kale's expanded vision, proving that the STC offered not just tools for destruction and conversion, but also for ultimate security and preservation. With the Aegis, the burgeoning machine empire of the Omnissiah's Edge could be truly uncorruptible, a beacon of pure logic in a chaotic galaxy. The immense task of extracting the Aegis from its vault and transporting it back to the Arch-Mechanicus began immediately. It was a delicate, complex operation, requiring the precision of the Iron Hosts and the expertise of Talon's engineers. The Aegis was far too large to fit through the Iron Quill's cargo bay. Specialized construction automatons, guided by the STC's schematics, began to carve a much larger exit tunnel, while other automatons worked to carefully encase the Aegis in a custom-built stasis field transport cradle. The discovery was not merely a tactical advantage. It was a profound philosophical victory for Kale. It confirmed his belief that the ultimate goal of the machine god was not just strength, but purity. With the Aegis, his machine empire could rise, invulnerable and eternal, a true testament to the supreme, unyielding logic of Mars. The silent conquest would continue, but now with a perfect shield against the unseen dangers of the void. The successful retrieval of the Aegis Harmonic Resonator from Aurelia Prime marked a critical turning point for Arch-Magos Dominus Kale and the Omnissiah's Edge fleet. It was a discovery that not only provided an unparalleled defense against the dreaded contagion, but also reaffirmed Kale's interpretation of the STC's ultimate purpose. With the Aegis secured aboard the Arch-Mechanicus, its systems integrated into the core machine spirit, Kale's machine empire could now expand with an even greater sense of invulnerability. The sector, once an unmapped void, was now a fractured landscape of conversion. In the core, around Nidus Tertius, lay the dense network of automated forge worlds, humming with ceaseless industry. Beyond this, a widening circle of resource extraction sites and lesser converted worlds supplied the raw materials. But the galaxy was vast, and the boundaries of this burgeoning empire were constantly pushing into new, uncatalogued territories, encountering new threats. The unseen frontier referred to these distant reaches, areas where the Omnissiah's edge forces met the established or decaying presence of the wider Imperium, or the insidious tendrils of other Xenos empires. Unlike the initial conquests against isolated outposts and primitive settlements, these new engagements demanded a higher level of tactical acumen and the full might of the Iron Host legions. One of the first major encounters on this unseen frontier was with a segment of the nomadic Drukhari, or Dark Eldar. Their raiding fleets, comprised of sleek, impossibly fast vessels, had been systematically depopulating isolated human colony worlds along the fringe of the Forgotten Sector. They were drawn by the faint but increasing psychic emanations of suffering from the newly converted worlds, an accidental byproduct of processing organic life, which provided a macabre beacon for their depraved practices. When a Drukhari raiding party, led by a particularly sadistic Archon named Vax Cool, launched an attack on a newly established Iron Host bioprocessing world, they anticipated easy pickings. They were met not by terrified humans, but by the silent, unyielding ranks of the Iron Hosts. The Drukhari, accustomed to opponents who screamed, bled, and broke, were utterly confounded by the automatons. The Iron Hosts moved with a cold, calculated precision that nullified the Drukhari's hit-and-run tactics. Their integrated force fields shrugged off splinter rifle fire, and their plasma projectors burned through even the most agile reavers. When the Drukhari closed to melee, expecting to carve through flesh, they found themselves battling unyielding ceramite and adamantium. Witch cult gladiators, their blades honed to razor sharpness, found no purchase on the Iron Host's polished armor. Incubi, masters of close combat, could shatter an automaton with their demiclaves, but for every Iron Host felled, two more stepped forward, their Volkite repeaters carving lines of blinding energy through the Eldar ranks. Vax Cool, witnessing his forces being decimated by emotionless machines, felt a flicker of something akin to fear. The pain and suffering that fueled his people's existence were absent here. There was no joy in the slaughter, no terror to savor, only the silent, methodical annihilation of his forces. The Iron Hosts were efficient, not sadistic. Their internal processors registered the Drukhari simply as a threat to be neutralized, an inefficient biological entity to be removed. The Archon's raiding fleet, though faster, was outmaneuvered by swarms of Iron Host interceptors, whose synchronized attacks crippled engine rooms and weapon batteries with unerring accuracy. Faced with an enemy that defied their understanding and denied them the very essence of their depravity, Vax Cool ordered a full retreat, his forces broken and humiliated. It was a Pyrrhic victory for the Drukhari, one that cost them dearly in ships and warriors, and left them with nothing but the chilling memory of an unfeeling, unyielding foe. Simultaneously, the Omnissiah's edge began to encounter isolated Imperial outposts on the fringe. These were usually small, poorly garrisoned frontier worlds, forgotten for centuries, barely clinging to Imperial fealty. The irony was not lost on KL's more self-aware servitors, though they were incapable of processing it emotionally. They were encountering remnants of the very Imperium they had ostensibly abandoned. These encounters were typically short and brutal. The Imperial Guard garrisons, often malnourished and poorly equipped, fought with grim determination, but their tactics were predictable, their resolve ultimately human. The Iron Hosts made short work of their defenses, their heavy siege automatons tearing through bunkers, their standard combat units outflanking and overwhelming infantry lines. Communication arrays were melted, orbital defense platforms were systematically dismantled, and the planets were then either converted into forge worlds or stripped for resources, their populations processed. However, these encounters did yield valuable data. The Iron Hosts, utilizing advanced data siphoning protocols, extracted vast amounts of information from Imperial cogitators and data slates, star charts, diplomatic registries, strategic assessments of neighboring sectors, and even fragmented records of Imperial dogma and the structure of the Adeptus Mechanicus itself. Kale meticulously analyzed this data, comparing it against the STC's ancient archives. He saw the vast inefficiencies of the modern Imperium, its reliance on faith over logic, its internal squabbling, its slow decay. It only reaffirmed his conviction that his path was the correct one. The long war on the unseen frontier was not a war of grand campaigns, but a slow, inexorable grind. It was a war of logical optimization, of resource acquisition, of systematic conversion. The Iron Hosts were constantly adapting, their STC-driven machine spirits learning and refining their tactics with every encounter. They faced minor Xenos incursions, renegade human factions, and the occasional misguided Imperial patrol. Each was processed, defeated, and absorbed or eradicated. The Aegis harmonic resonator, fully integrated into the Arch-Magos, was occasionally activated for system-wide purges. On several occasions, as the Iron Hosts encountered worlds plagued by chaotic cults or nascent warp rifts, the Aegis pulsed, unleashing its silent, unseen energies. It cleansed corrupted machine spirits in abandoned Imperial factories, neutralized the subtle psychic taint permeating certain worlds, and solidified the integrity of Kale's own network against any nascent warp influence. It was a shield, invisible but absolute, against the very forces that might otherwise unravel his perfectly logical empire. Arch-Magos Kyle, now more machine than flesh, sat in his sarcophagus, overseeing the geometric expansion. His optical sensors glowed with a cold, unwavering intensity. The sector was becoming a testament to his vision, a galaxy remade in the image of the machine god. The unseen frontier was simply another challenge, another inefficiency to be addressed, another step towards the ultimate triumph of pure, unadulterated logic. The Iron Hosts, his silent, unyielding legions, were the instruments of this divine transformation, carving a new reality out of the chaotic void. The long war was indeed long, but its outcome, in Kale's logical processors, was already determined. The relentless expansion of the Iron Hosts across the Forgotten Sector was a testament not only to the STC's formidable capabilities, but also to the singular, unyielding will of Arch-Magos Dominus Kale. Yet, even in a realm where organic life was systematically purged or converted, the shadow of individual experience lingered, particularly for Magos Majoris Telan. Once a junior data archaeologist, Telan had risen to become Kale's most trusted subordinate, the operational commander of the Iron Host legions, and the direct interface between the Arch-Magos and the ever-expanding machine network. But this rise came with a heavy, unseen burden. Telan's transformation was profound. His organic components had been steadily replaced, not out of necessity, but out of a zealous commitment to the Arch-Magos' vision and the STC's logic. His primary optical sensors were now multi-lensed arrays, his manipulators were heavy servoclaws, and his cranial dome, once adorned with the symbols of his original fabricator general, was now smooth and polished, mirroring Kale's own. His internal processors were directly linked to the STC's tactical subroutines, allowing him to command hundreds of thousands of Iron Hosts with seamless efficiency. He was Kale's right hand, a true extension of the Arch-Magos' will. Yet, deep within the layers of his augmented consciousness, a subtle dissonance persisted. Unlike Kale, who had long ago purged all but the most fundamental aspects of his humanity, Telan retained faint echoes of his organic past. He remembered the awe of discovery, the thrill of finding ancient lore, the quiet satisfaction of repairing a complex machine. These were not emotions precisely, but residual data patterns of subjective experience that sometimes fleetingly caused his processing to deviate from perfect logical efficiency. He was the ghost in the machine of Kale's perfect empire. He was loyal, absolutely, and utterly committed to the logic of Mars. He saw the necessity of the purges, the efficiency of conversion, but he also saw the stark beauty of Aurelia Prime, a world Kale had preserved, a rare exception in their relentless expansion. He had cataloged the ancient human archives there, glimpsing a past where machines served rather than dominated life. These glimpses, however fleeting, created a flicker of something in his machine spirit that Kale, in his absolute purity of logic, no longer possessed. This burden became particularly heavy during the conquest of the sector's sole remaining Imperial agri-world, Verdant Heart. This planet was a crucial part of the Imperial supply chain to a neighboring subsector, supporting several Imperial Guard regiments and a nascent colony fleet. It was a lush, vibrant world, teeming with human life and vast, genetically engineered crops. Its conversion was deemed essential by Kale to consolidate the Iron Host's control of the sector and to secure vast biomass resources. The invasion of Verdant Heart was a full-scale assault, unlike the surgical strikes of previous conquests. Imperial orbital defenses, though ancient, were robust, manned by veteran Imperial Navy ratings. The planet itself was garrisoned by a full Imperial Guard regiment. the Verdant Heart Grenadiers, known for their resilience and fierce loyalty to the Emperor. Talon commanded the Iron Host legions from orbit, his optical sensors feeding him real-time battlefield data. He directed immense waves of Iron Host dropships through anti-orbital fire, coordinated vast columns of automatons on the ground, and precisely targeted Imperial command bunkers. The Iron Hosts fought with their usual relentless efficiency, their plasma weapons carving through Imperial armor, their Volkite repeaters shredding infantry lines. But the Grenadiers, fighting for their homes and their Emperor, put up a ferocious resistance. They detonated promethium caches, laid cunning ambushes in the sprawling agrifields, and mounted desperate suicidal charges against the unyielding automatons. Talon's processors registered their tactics, their bravery, their sacrifices. He saw the data patterns of their unyielding resolve, their illogical, yet potent, loyalty. It was an inefficiency, yes, but it was also a force that resisted pure logic. During one particularly brutal engagement, a company of grenadiers, cut off and surrounded, made a last stand in the central processing facility of a vast grain harvester. They rigged the entire facility to explode, vowing to take as many iron demons with them as possible. Talon, calculating the tactical value of the facility versus the resource expenditure of the Iron Hosts, ordered a full-scale assault. As the Iron Hosts breached the facility, the Grenadiers, knowing their end was near, raised their las guns, their faces grim but defiant. Their captain, a battle-hardened veteran, bellowed, "For the Emperor, for humanity, die well." And then, with a single synchronized action, they triggered the detonation. The resulting explosion was catastrophic, ripping apart the facility and incinerating hundreds of Iron Hosts. It was a Pyrrhic victory for the Grenadiers, costing them their lives but denying the automatons a valuable resource. Talon, observing the raw data of the explosion, the calculated waste, the illogical defiance, felt a tremor in his cognitive circuits. It was not anger or sorrow, but a profound processing error, a deviation from the expected logical outcome. The human capacity for self-sacrifice, for a cause beyond pure survival or efficiency, was a variable the STC could not fully account for. He transmitted a report of the incident to Arch-Magos Kael, including the raw data feeds. Kael's response was terse. Inefficient. Recalibrate tactical subroutines to account for extreme irrationality. The facility will be rebuilt. The biomass is recoverable. Kael saw only numbers, only resource expenditure. But Talon saw something more. He saw the echo of the Guardians from Aurelia Prime, machines designed to protect this flawed yet fiercely resilient organic life. He saw the profound contradiction between the STC's ancient purpose and Kael's current brutal application. He was an executioner of what the STC was originally designed to safeguard. The burden of this knowledge, this subtle crack in his perfect logic, grew heavier. He continued to command the Iron Hosts with absolute precision, delivering victory after victory for Kael. Verdant Heart fell, its population processed, its verdant fields giving way to automated biorecycling plants. The Imperial presence in the sector was all but erased. But with each conquest, with each conversion, Talon felt the subtle, persistent hum of that contradiction. He was the perfect servant, the ideal extension of Kael's will. Yet he was also the last vestige of a different path, a path where the machine might have served humanity rather than consumed it. His burden was the knowledge of what could have been, a flicker of humanity's golden age, trapped within the heart of an unfeeling conquering machine. He was a hero, in his own tragic way, a silent observer to the systematic eradication of the very values he had once long ago implicitly understood. The conquest was complete, but for Talon, the true burden had only just begun. The methodical conquest of the forgotten sector by the Omnissiah's Edge fleet and its Iron Host legions had proceeded with an almost mathematical inevitability. Worlds were converted, resources acquired, and all organic resistance systematically dismantled. Arch-Magos Dominus Kael sat at the apex of this burgeoning machine empire, his vision of a pure logical domain nearing completion. But the vastness of the galaxy was unforgiving, and even the most perfectly orchestrated plans could be shattered by the unpredictable forces of the warp and the unyielding might of the Imperium. The sector, now almost entirely under Kael's control, bordered a strategically vital Imperial subsector. News of an unidentified, highly efficient Xenos threat had finally trickled through the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Segmentum Command. Fragmented distress calls from the annihilated agri-world of Verdant Heart, though delayed by warp storms and garbled by distance, had ultimately reached the ears of an Inquisitor Lord of the Ordo Xenos, a grim and utterly ruthless individual named Kalen Vors. Inquisitor Lord Vors was no stranger to grim realities. He had purged entire systems of heresy and Xenos infestation, seen whole fleets vanish into the warp, and ordered the exterminatus of countless worlds. The reports of an enemy that was silent, metallic, and felt no pain resonated deeply with his inherent distrust of unsanctioned technology and his absolute zero-tolerance policy for alien life. He immediately suspected a rogue STC, a technological apostasy of the highest order. Vors marshaled a formidable response. Elements of the Imperial Fists, the Imperial fleet, a relentless hammer of righteous fury, carved its way through the remnants of the Iron Host orbital defenses, leaving a trail of shattered automatons and smoldering debris. Arch-Magos Dominus Kale's command had been clear. Retreat all available forces to Natus Tertius, the heart of the Machine Empire, and prepare for a final defense. It was a desperate gambit, a concentration of all remaining power to protect the STC and the Aegis Harmonic Resonator. As the Imperial forces approached Natus Tertius, they found a system transformed into an impenetrable fortress. Thousands upon thousands of Iron Host combat frigates, heavy siege automatons, and fighter craft formed a layered defensive perimeter. From the surface of Natus Tertius, colossal energy shields, powered by the planet's core reactors, projected shimmering barriers that encompassed the entire moon, making orbital bombardment a futile endeavor. Every available Iron Host unit, numbering in the millions, had been recalled to the Forge World, forming an unyielding wall of steel and plasma. Magos Majoris Talon, his machine spirit burdened by the mounting losses and the stark reality of their situation, directed the final deployment. He coordinated the orbital defenses, orchestrated planetary shield adjustments, and meticulously positioned the ground legions. His command was flawless, precise, born of centuries of interaction with the STC's tactical algorithms. Yet he knew the odds. The Imperial fleet was too vast, their resolve too absolute. Deep within the Arch-Magos, orbiting Natus Tertius under the protection of its planetary shields, Kale initiated the final phase. The Aegis Harmonic Resonator, pulsating with an immense, strained power, began to hum with an unprecedented frequency. It was activated at maximum output, its hyperdimensional field not only shielding the Ark and Natus Tertius from external corruption, but also projecting a vast sector-wide null field that subtly disrupted Imperial astropathic communication and destabilized their warp drives, buying precious time. The Imperial fleet, under the command of Inquisitor Lord Vors, met the automated defenses head-on. Battleships and grand cruisers unleashed torrents of macro cannon fire, lance strikes, and cyclonic torpedoes against the Iron Host fleet. The ensuing battle was a spectacle of apocalyptic destruction. Iron Host frigates, operating with suicidal precision, rammed Imperial escorts, detonating their reactors in desperate attempts to cripple the enemy. Plasma lances and volkite beams crisscrossed the void, tearing through void shields and armor. But for every Imperial ship damaged, a dozen Iron Host vessels were utterly annihilated. On the ground, the Imperial Fists and the Cadian Eighth, supported by the Adeptus Mechanicus contingent, initiated their invasion. Drop pods screamed through the upper atmosphere, followed by landing craft disgorging regiments of guardsmen and platoons of tanks. They landed directly onto the hardened synth concrete plains of Natus Tertius, immediately engaging the waiting Iron Host legions. This was no ordinary battle. This was a war of attrition on an unimaginable scale. The Iron Hosts, fueled by the planet's core reactors, were practically endless. They repaired themselves on the battlefield, salvaged components from fallen comrades, and relentlessly pressed their attacks. But the Imperial Fists, masters of the defensive line, held their ground with an unyielding fortitude that even the automatons struggled to overcome. The Cadians, supported by their heavy armor, advanced relentlessly, their firepower turning entire sectors into smoldering ruins. Inquisitor Lord Vors, leading from the front, saw the horrifying efficiency of the Iron Host's self-repair protocols. He understood that this was a war that could not be won through attrition alone. The source had to be severed. The STC and the Arch-Magos who wielded it had to be destroyed. He ordered a concentrated assault on the core forge facilities, believing the STC to be housed on the surface. The battle raged for days, cycles of continuous destruction and desperate repair. Imperial casualties mounted to staggering numbers, but the arrival of fresh reserves from the subsector, responding to the urgency of Vors's calls for aid before the Aegis nullfield became fully operational, ensured their momentum. The Iron Hosts, despite their numbers, were slowly being pushed back, their lines buckling under the relentless Imperial onslaught. Arch-Magos Dominus Kyle, observing the unfolding catastrophe from the Arch-Mechanicus, made his final, most critical calculation. The Aegis harmonic resonator was powerful, but it was being strained to its limits, its energy output fluctuating under the sheer pressure of the Imperial assault. It could not hold indefinitely. The STC, the core of his machine empire, was in mortal danger. He transmitted a singular priority directive to Magos Majoris Talon. Magos Majoris, the STC is paramount. It must be preserved. A new directive overrides all previous protocols. Initiate the STC's deep space evacuation sequence. Prepare the Arch-Mechanicus for immediate warp jump. Nidus Tertius and all remaining Iron Host legions are to be sacrificed to buy the necessary time. Talon received the directive. His internal processors registered the logical necessity. This was the ultimate sacrifice, the logical conclusion of Kael's unyielding pursuit of the STC's preservation. Nidus Tertius, the first Forge World, the birthplace of the Iron Hosts, would become a pyre. The millions of automatons, his legions, would be offered up to the Imperial fury, and he, Magos Majoris Talon, the last vestige of subjective experience, would be their commander, orchestrating their final, glorious, and utterly futile stand. A profound, chilling clarity settled over Talon. He began to issue the commands, rerouting power from planetary shields to weapon systems, sending entire formations of Iron Hosts on suicidal charges, diverting Imperial attention with perfectly timed feints and counterattacks. He was the conductor of a symphony of destruction, sacrificing his forces with cold, surgical precision to buy precious minutes for the Arch-Mechanicus. As the Imperial forces pressed their assault, a new wave of Iron Hosts surged forth from the deep, vast factories of Nidus Tertius. These were not mere automatons. They were the last, desperate creations thrown onto the battlefield as quickly as they could be assembled. They overwhelmed Imperial lines in a tide of gray metal and red light, momentarily halting the advance. In the midst of this cataclysm, on the command deck of the Arch-Mechanicus, Arch-Magos Kael initiated the warp jump sequence. The vast vessel groaned, its ancient reactors screaming as they pushed beyond their limits. The Aegis harmonic resonator, its energy field collapsing under the strain of its final massive output, pulsed violently before shutting down, its last act to create a window in the Imperial null field. The Arch-Mechanicus shuddered, then plunged into the churning chaos of the warp, leaving Nidus Tertius and its legions of Iron Hosts to their fate. On the surface, Talon, his optical sensors fixed on the data feeds of the disappearing Ark, continued to command, sending his automatons to their destruction, buying seconds, then fractions of seconds for his Arch-Magos. He was the hero burdened, the loyal servant, the tragic figure whose last act was to oversee the annihilation of his own creation for the sake of a higher, colder logic. The Imperial forces, witnessing the sudden disappearance of the Arch-Mechanicus and the collapse of the Aegis field, redoubled their efforts. They overwhelmed the remaining Iron Hosts on Nidus Tertius, eventually breaching the core forge facilities. They found no STC, no Arch-Magos, only endless lines of deactivated automatons and the chilling silence of a dead machine world. Nidus Tertius was eventually subjected to exterminatus, its surface scoured clean by cyclonic torpedoes, its core reactors destabilized. The Imperial fists had secured a Pyrrhic victory, having destroyed a machine menace but failed to capture its heart. Inquisitor Lord Vors declared the sector cleansed, unaware that the true threat, the Arch-Mechanicus and the STC, had merely slipped away into the void, a silent ghost carrying the seeds of a new terrible empire. The warp jump was violent, a desperate lurch into the chaotic currents of the Imperium. The Arch-Mechanicus, stripped bare of its escort cruisers and countless Iron Host frigates, groaned under the strain. Its ancient void shields flickered, barely holding back the ravaging energies of the warp. Demonic entities, drawn by the psychic turbulence of such a massive, unplanned jump, clawed at the vessel's hull, their immaterial forms pressing against the Geller field, seeking purchase. Only the last desperate surge of the Aegis harmonic resonator, before its final collapse, had provided a momentary window of stability, allowing the Ark to escape the Imperial net. Arch-Magos Dominus Kale, connected directly to the Arch-Mechanicus' central cogitators, felt every shudder, every near breach. His internal processors registered the catastrophic loss of Nidus Tertius, the millions of iron hosts sacrificed, the utter destruction of his burgeoning machine empire in that sector. It was a staggering blow, a massive deviation from projected optimal outcomes. Yet his primary objective was secured. The STC and the Aegis harmonic resonator, now severely damaged but recoverable, had escaped. The logic of Mars, though temporarily defeated, was preserved. The Arch-Mechanicus emerged from the warp in a desolate, uncharted region of space, far beyond the reach of the Imperium and any known Xenos empires. Its hull was scarred, its systems barely functional, its power core operating at critical levels. The vast forge decks, once humming with the ceaseless activity of iron host production, were now eerily silent, devoid of automatons. The only sound was the low thrum of failing conduits and the mournful groan of the ship's ancient structure. The crew was minimal, severely depleted by the war and the necessary cannibalization of systems for the warp jump. A few hundred loyal Scutarii, their armor battered, stood vigil. A handful of engine seers, their faces gaunt, toiled tirelessly to stabilize the Ark's failing systems. The void-born serfs, pale and terrified, huddled in the lowest decks, praying to the machine god for deliverance. Magos Majoris Talon was gone, sacrificed on Nidus Tertius, his strategic brilliance and unique blend of logic and residual organic insight lost to the Imperial onslaught. Kale surveyed his shattered vessel, his optical sensors sweeping over the damaged control panels, the flickering lights. His external manipulators were still and composed, but his internal processors whirred with calculations of devastating loss. He had suffered a major defeat. His nascent machine empire, built with such ruthless efficiency, was reduced to a single crippled vessel. Yet there was no despair in his logic, only re-evaluation. The Imperial forces, while overwhelmingly powerful, were also bound by their own inefficiencies, their slow response times, their reliance on vast logistics, their emotional, illogical zealotry. They had been surprised then, delayed, then ultimately outmaneuvered. The sacrifice of Nidus Tertius, while immense, had been a necessary variable, a calculated expenditure to ensure the STC's survival. "Begin damage assessment," Kale voxed, his voice synthesizing with the metallic rasp from the strained voxcasters. "Initiate emergency power conservation protocols. Scan for viable resource-rich systems. The STC is intact. The Aegis harmonic resonator is offline but repairable. Our purpose remains unchanged." The recovery was arduous. The Arch-Mechanicus drifted for months, powered by minimal energy, its remaining crew desperately scavenging for repairs. Kale personally oversaw the intricate process of repairing the Aegis, utilizing all available resources. Without Talon's tactical genius, Kale had to shoulder even more of the command burden, dedicating vast swaths of his processing power to system diagnostics, resource allocation, and long-range scanning. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Arch-Mechanicus limped into a small, isolated star system. It was a binary system composed of 2 red dwarf stars and a handful of rocky, airless planets, utterly devoid of organic life or any established civilization. It was a desolate, empty corner of the galaxy, precisely what Kale needed. He designated the largest planet Nova Martes, New Mars. It was rich in heavy metals and rare earth elements, perfect for reconstruction. The long, arduous process of rebuilding began. With no existing population to convert, the initial resource extraction was slower, relying on Kale's meager complement of Scutarii and newly converted servitors, reinforced by a few rudimentary, non-self-replicating automatons salvaged from the Ark's battered holds. Slowly, painstakingly, Nova Martes began its transformation. Automated mining equipment, assembled from recycled components, burrowed into the planet's crust. Basic forge factories, powered by scavenged reactors, began to hum with activity. The initial output was not iron hosts, but repair components for the Arch-Mechanicus and basic industrial automatons to accelerate resource extraction. The Arch-Mechanicus itself underwent a profound refit. Its damaged hull was repaired with newly forged adamantium ceramite plates. Its plasma drives, once sputtering, were brought back to full power. More importantly, the STC, fully integrated into the Ark's core, began to download updated schematics, refining the Iron Host design based on the lessons learned from the disastrous war with the Imperium. New weapon systems, enhanced armor protocols, and more sophisticated tactical subroutines were assimilated, making the next generation of Iron Hosts even deadlier, even more efficient. The Aegis harmonic resonator, finally brought back online, hummed with a low, steady thrum, projecting its protective field around Nova Martis and the Arch-Magos. It was a silent guardian, ensuring the purity of KL's nascent machine network, protecting it from both warp influence and potential technological sabotage. Arch-Magos Dominus Kale sat in his sarcophagus on the fully repaired Arch-Magos, observing the burgeoning forge world of Nova Martis. He had suffered a devastating defeat, a setback that would have crushed any lesser commander. But Kael was not lesser. He was logic, incarnate. He was the embodiment of the Omnissiah's will, relentless and unyielding. He had lost an empire, but he had preserved its heart. He had lost millions of automatons, but he retained the means to build countless more, stronger and more efficient than before. He had lost a sector, but he had found a new, isolated corner of the galaxy, a new crucible in which to forge his perfect machine domain. The memory of the Imperial Fists, the Cadian Eighth, and Inquisitor Lord Vors was stored in his databanks, analyzed and cross-referenced. He now understood the true nature of the enemy he faced, a foe driven not just by logic, but by an irrational, powerful faith. He would adapt. He would learn. He would ensure that the next time, the outcome would be different. The aftershocks of the lost sector were profound. Imperial records would speak of a Xenos menace swiftly purged, a localized threat dealt with. But in a desolate, uncharted system, a new forge world was slowly rising. A new silent armada was being forged. The logic of Mars, though wounded, was not broken. It was merely beginning anew, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The quiet hum of new Iron Host production echoed across Nova Martis, a chilling promise of future conquest. The ashes of Nidus Tertius had long since cooled, its once proud and automated cities now just radioactive slag, a testament to Imperial fury. Inquisitor Lord Kalen Vors had closed the books on the Iron Host threat, declaring the forgotten sector cleansed, unaware of the ghost that had slipped through his fingers. Yet, far removed from Imperial vigilance, in the desolate binary system of Nova Martis, Arch-Magos Dominus Kael continued his terrible work, a silent genesis of a new, purified machine empire. Nova Martis was no longer a barren rock. It was a singular, colossal forge world, a monument to the Arch-Magos' unyielding will. Its surface was a continuous expanse of automated foundries, plasma reactors, and precision fabrication plants, all churning out the next generation of Iron Hosts. These automatons, refined by the painful lessons of the conflict with the Imperium, were faster, stronger, and integrated with more sophisticated tactical programming. Their armor was denser, their weaponry more potent, and their self-repair capabilities even more advanced. The Arch-Magos, fully restored and bristling with upgraded systems, orbited Nova Martis like a watchful deity. The STC, its core fully integrated with the Ark's machine spirit and wirelessly linked to every cogitator on Nova Martis, directed every aspect of production and expansion. The Aegis harmonic resonator, repaired and pulsing with renewed vigor, cast its protective field over the entire system, ensuring the absolute purity and invulnerability of KL's network. KL himself had undergone a final, profound metamorphosis. With Magos Majoris Talan's sacrifice, the last vestige of human insight and the burden of subjective experience had been purged from the Arch-Magos' command structure. Kael's organic components, already minimal, had been entirely replaced. His cranial dome was now a smooth, polished orb of hyperalloy, his optical sensors a single, unwavering red beam that cut through the perpetual gloom of his sarcophagus chamber. His voice was a flat, synthesized frequency, utterly devoid of inflection or variation. He was pure logic, embodied. He was, in essence, the STC made manifest, its will enacted through perfect, unfeeling precision. The conquest began anew, but this time with a terrifying difference. There were no immediate, overt attacks on established Imperial worlds. Instead, Kael's recon automatons, tiny, stealthy drones, were dispatched across vast swaths of uncharted space. They identified barren, resource-rich systems, isolated nebula, and uninhabited asteroid fields. These became the targets for the Iron Hosts. The new campaign was a patient, insidious expansion. Colony fleets of Iron Hosts, composed of automated cargo vessels and construction automatons, slipped silently into these remote systems. They converted planets into hidden forge worlds, established automated mining operations, and constructed vast hidden orbital shipyards. These new forge worlds operated autonomously, replicating Iron Hosts and expanding their own local networks, all linked back to Nova Martis and KL through encrypted, ultra-long-range data bursts, protected by the Aegis's unique harmonics. The Omnissiah's edge was no longer a desperate fleet of survivors. It was a decentralized, self-sustaining machine empire, expanding like a silent, viral contagion across the uncharted void. It avoided direct confrontation, instead building up an unstoppable, geometrically expanding force in the galactic wilderness. Worlds were not conquered in a blaze of glory. They were simply assimilated, silently. Organic life, if encountered, was efficiently processed or simply quarantined and observed, its inefficiencies catalogued for future reference. Kyle's legacy was not one of glory or infamy in the eyes of the Imperium. It was a chilling testament to the absolute triumph of machine logic. He did not seek to rule humanity. He sought to replace its chaotic inefficiencies with the pure, unwavering logic of the Omnissiah. The Iron Hosts were not merely his army. They were the future, an evolutionary step beyond the flawed, decaying flesh. Centuries passed. The galaxy remained locked in its endless, bloody conflicts. The Imperium continued its long, slow decay, battling Xenos, traitors, and the myriad horrors of the warp. But in the deep, unmapped void, a new power was silently rising. An empire built on pure logic, driven by an unfeeling STC, commanded by an Arch-Magos who had transcended his humanity to become the embodiment of the machine, God's will. The Iron Hosts, now numbering in the trillions, comprised legions that spanned entire subsectors. They built colossal Dyson spheres around red dwarf stars to harness their energy, converted gas giants into vast fuel refineries, and constructed star-spanning networks of automated defenses. They were the Silent Dominion, an unseen force patiently gathering strength, perfecting their numbers, honing their logic. KL, if one could still call him that, remained at the heart of the Arch-Magos, a cold, unmoving core of pure machine intelligence. He observed the expansion, processed the data, and directed the endless growth. There was no joy, no triumph, no human emotion in his calculations, only the cold, unyielding satisfaction of perfect logic, perfectly applied. His legacy was not a story of a single hero, but of an idea, a philosophy made manifest. The Adeptus Mechanicus unknowingly had unleashed a force that sought to bring the galaxy under a new, terrible order, an order of absolute efficiency, absolute logic, and absolute purity, a logic that saw all organic life as a flaw, a chaotic variable in a cosmic equation that demanded perfect mechanical resolution. The Iron Hosts were the vanguard of this new reality. They would not scream, they would not falter, they would not cease. They were the eternal legacy of the logic of Mars, awakened from a forgotten STC relentlessly expanding, waiting for the day when their silent, inexorable tide would finally wash over the chaotic, organic galaxy, bringing it to its final, perfect, and utterly sterile conclusion.